The Pig Children by Tyston Bane. No one, not the oldest dark elf of Mount Daggerfall or the ancient sage of solitude himself, can recall a time when the orc did not ravage our fair Tamriel. Whatever foul and pestilent daedra of oblivion conjured them up could scarcely have created a more constant threat to the well-being of the civilized races of Tamriel than the obnoxious orc. Orcs are thankfully easy to recognize from their humanoids by their size, commonly 40 pertans in height and 15,000 engeds in weight, their brutal pig-like features, and their stench. They are consistently belligerent, morally grotesque, and intellectually moronic and unclean. By all rights, the uncivilized races of Tamriel should have been able to purge the land of their blight eras ago, but their ferocity, animal cunning, and curious tribal loyalty have made them inevitable as leeches in a stagnant pool. Tales of orcish barbarity precede written record. When Justaiga wrote of the Order of Diagonus joining the armies of Daggerfall and Sentinel to hold at bay the wicked orcs in their foul Orsinian fastness and burn aught in cleansing flame in the First Era 950, she assumed that any reader would be aware of the savagery of orcs. When the siege was completed 30 years later, after the death of many heroes including Gaiden Shinji, and the destruction of Orsinium scattered the orcish survivors throughout the Hrothgarian mountains, she further wrote, "The free peoples rejoiced, for that their ancient fell enemy was dispersed into diverse parts. Obviously, the orcs had been terrorizing the region of the Iliac Bay at least since the early years of the First Era, and that was the Pig Children." The Real Barenziah, Part 1. 500 years ago, in Mournhold, city of gems, there lived a blind widow woman and her only child, a strapping young man. He was a miner, as was his father before him, a common laborer in the king's mines, for his magicka ability was but small. The work was honorable but poorly paid. His mother made and sold small Wildenberry cakes in the market to help eke out their living. They did well enough, his mother said. They had enough to fill their bellies, no one could wear more than one suit of clothing at a time, and the roof only leaked when it rained. Semekis would have liked more. He had hoped for a lucky strike in the mines, which would garner him a large bonus. In his free hours he enjoyed hoisting a glass of ale in the tavern with his friends, and gambling with them at cards, and he drew the eyes and sighs of more than one pretty elven girl, although no one held his interest for long. In short, Semekis was a typical young dark elf man, remarkable only for his size. It was rumored that he had a bit of Nord blood in him. In Semekis' 30th year, there was great rejoicing in Mournhold, for a girl child was born to their lord and his lady. A queen, the people sang, a queen is born to us. For among the people of Mournhold, the birth of a female heir is a sure sign of peace and prosperity to come. When the time came for the royal child's rite of naming, the mines were closed and Semekis rushed home to bathe and dress in his best. "I'll come straight home and tell you all about it," he promised his mother, who was not to attend. She had been ailing. Besides, there would be a great crush of people, as all Mournhold would be there, and being blind, she would be unable to see anything anyway. "My son," she said, "ere you go, fetch me a priest or healer, else I may pass from this mortal plane ere you return." Semekis crossed to her bed at once, and noted anxiously that her hand was very hot and her breathing shallow. He pried up the loose floorboard, where their small hoard of savings was kept. There wasn't nearly enough to pay a priest for healing. He would have to give what they had and owe the rest. Semekis snatched up his cloak and rushed away. The streets were full of folk hurrying to the sacred grove, but the mage guild and the temples were locked and barred, closed for the ceremony, read the signs. Semekis elbowed his way through the crowd and managed to overtake a brown-robed monk. "After the right, brother," the monk said. "If you have gold, I shall gladly to attend your mother. My lord has bade all clerics to attend, and I shall not offend him. My mother's desperately ill," Semekis pled. "Surely my lord will not miss just one lowly monk." "The father abbot will," the monk said nervously, tearing his robe loose from Semekis' grip and vanishing into the crowd. Semekis tried other monks and mages too, but with no better result. Armored guards came through the street and pushed him aside with their lances, and Semekis realized that the royal procession was approaching. As the royal carriage drew abreast, Semekis rushed out from the crowd and shouted, "My lord, my mother's dying." "I forbid her to do so on this glorious night," the lord shouted, laughing and scattering coin into the throng. Semekis was close enough to smell wine on the royal breath. On the other side of the carriage, his lady clutched her babe to her breast and stared wide-eyed at Semekis, her nostrils flared in disdain. "Guard," she cried, "remove this oaf." Rough hands seized Semekis. He was beaten and left dazed by the side of the road. Semekis, head aching, followed in the wake of the crowd and watched the rite of naming from top the hill. He could see the brown-robed clerics and blue-robed mages gathered near the royal folk far below. Barenziah. The name came dim to Semekis' ear as the high priest lifted the naked baby and showed her to the twin moons on either side of the horizon. Joan rising, Jode setting. Behold the Lady Barenziah, born to the rule of Mournhold. Grant her thy blessings and thy counsel, ever that she rule to Mournhold's weal. Blessings, blessings, all the people murmured with their lord and lady, hands upraised. Only Semekis stood silent, head bowed, knowing that in his heart that his dear mother was gone, and in his silence he swore a mighty oath that he should be his lord's bane, and in vengeance for his mother's needless death, the child Barenziah would have as his own bride, that his mother's grandchild should be born to rule Mournhold. After the ceremony he watched it passively as the royal procession returned to the palace. He saw the monk to whom he'd spoken first. The man came gladly enough now in return for the gold Semekis had and a promise of more later. They found his mother dead, as he had feared. The monk sighed and tucked the bag away. I'm sorry, brother. Well, you can forget the rest of the gold, as there's naught I can do here likely. Give me back my gold, Semekis snarled. You've done naught to earn it. He lifted his right arm threateningly. The priest backed away, beginning a curse, but Semekis struck him before more than 3 words had left his mouth. He went down heavily, striking his head sharply on one of the stones that formed the fire pit. He died instantly. Semekis took the gold back and fled the city, muttering the name Barenziah. The child Barenziah stood on the upper balcony of the palace, staring down into the courtyard where soldiers milled, splendid in their armor. Presently they formed into ordered ranks and cheered as her parents, the lord and lady, emerged from the palace, clad head to toe in ebony armor, long purple-dyed fur cloaks, flowing behind, splendidly comparison, shining black horses were brought for them, and they mounted and rode to the country yard gates, then turned to salute her. Barenziah, they cried. Barenziah, farewell. The little girl blinked back tears and waved bravely with one hand. Her favorite stuffed toy animal, a gray wolf cub she called Wolfen, clutched to her breast with the other. She had never been parted from her parents before and had no idea what it meant, save that there was a war in the west, and the names Tiber Septim and Semekis were on everyone's lips, spoken with hate and dread. Barenziah, the soldiers cried, lifting their lances and swords and bows. Then her dear parents turned and rode away, soldiers trailing in their wake until the palace was near emptied. Some time after came a day when Barenziah was shaken awake by her nurse, dressed hurriedly and carried from the palace. All she remembered of that dreadful time was seeing a huge shadow with burning eyes that filled the sky. She was passed from hand to hand. Foreign soldiers appeared. Her nurse vanished and was replaced by strangers, some more strangers than others. There were days, or was it weeks, of travel. One morning she woke to step from the coach into a cold place with a large gray stone house set amid endless empty gray-green and hills patchily covered with gray-white snow. She clutched Wolfen to her breast with both hands and stood blinking and shivering in the gray dawn, feeling very small and very black in all the endless space, gray-white space. A large gray-white woman was staring at her with dreadful bright blue eyes. She's very black, isn't she? The woman remarked to her companion, a brown-skinned, black-haired woman named Hannah, who had been traveling with Barenziah for several days. I've never seen a dark elf before. I don't know much about them myself, Hannah said. This one's got red hair and a temper to match, I can tell you that. Take care, she bites. And worse. I'll soon train that out of her, the other woman sniffed. And what's that filthy thing she's got? Ugh. The woman snatched Wolfen away and cast him into the fire blazing in the hearth. Barenziah shrieked and would have flung herself into the fire after him, but was forcibly restrained, despite her attempts to bite and claw her oppressors, while poor Wolfen was reduced to a little heap of charred ash. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was The Real Barenziah, Part 1. The Real Barenziah, Part 2. Barenziah grew like a weed transplanted to a Skyrim garden. A ward of Port Svin and his wife, Lady Inga. Outwardly she thrived, but there was a cold and empty place within. I've raised her as my own daughter, Lady Inga was wont to sigh, but when she sat gossiping with her neighbor ladies coming to visit. But she's a dark elf, what can you expect? Barenziah was not meant to overhear these words. At least, she thought she was not. Her hearing was far keener than that of her Nord hosts. Other, less desirable dark elf traits included pilfering, lying, and a little magic. Just a small fire spell and a little levitation. And as she grew older, a keen interest in boys and men, who would provide very pleasant sensations and, to her astonishment, gifts as well. Inga disapproved of this activity for reasons incomprehensible to Barenziah, so she was careful to keep it as secret as possible. She's wonderful with the children, Inga added, meaning her 5 sons, all younger than Barenziah. She'd never seen them come to harm. A tutor was hired when Johnny was 6 and Barenziah 8, and she studied academic lessons along with him. She would have liked arms training as well, but the very idea of a girl training to arms scandalized Inga and Sven. Barenziah was given a bow and allowed to practice target shooting with the boys. She watched them at arms practice when she could, practiced with them when no grown folk were about, and knew she was as good or better than they. "She's very proud, isn't she?" the neighbor lady would whisper, and Barenziah, pretending not to hear, would nod in agreement. She could not help but feel superior to the count and countess. There was something about them that encouraged this disdain from her. She grew to learn that Sven and Inga were distant cousins of the last rulers of Darkmoon, and then she began to understand. They were posers, impostors, not rulers at all. At least, they were not raised to rule. This thought made her strangely furious at them, a good clean hatred detached from resentment. Barenziah came to see them as a disgusting and corrupted insect who could be despised but never feared. Once a month a courier came from the Emperor, bringing a small bag of gold for Inga and Sven and a large bag of dried mushrooms for Morrowind for Barenziah's consumption. She was always made presentable as a skinny dark elf girl could be made to look in Inga's eyes, and summoned into the courier's presence for a brief interview. The same courier seldom came twice, but all looked her over rather as a farmer looks over a pig he's readying for market. In the spring of her 16th year, Barenziah thought the courier looked as if she were at last ready for market. Upon reflection, Barenziah decided that she did not wish to be marketed. The stable boy, Straw, a big blond boy, clumsy, gentle, affectionate, and rather simple, had been urging her to run off with him for some weeks. Barenziah stole the bag of gold the courier had left, took the mushrooms from the storeroom, dressed herself as a boy in some of 12-year-old Timmy's casual dress clothes, and one fine spring night they took the 2 best horses and rode hard through the night toward Whiterun, the nearest city of any size, which was where Straw wanted to go. But Morrowind also lay east, and it drew Barenziah as a lodestone does iron. In the morning, they abandoned the horses at Barenziah's insistence. She knew they would be missed and tracked, and she hoped to throw pursuers off the trail. They continued afoot until late afternoon, keeping to side roads, then slept for several hours in an abandoned hut. They went on at dusk and came to the Whiterun city gates just before dawn. Barenziah had prepared a pass for Straw, stating an errand to a temple in the city for a local village lord. She herself sneaked over the wall with the help of her levitation spell. She had reasoned that by now the gate guards would have been alerted to look for a young dark elf girl and a Nord boy traveling together. But country boys like Straw were common enough. Alone, and with papers, he would be unlikely to draw their attention. Her simple plan went smoothly. She met Straw at the temple, which was not far from the gate. She had been to Whiterun only a few previous occasions. Straw, however, had never been more than a few miles from Sven's estate, his birthplace. Together they made their way to a run-down inn in the poorer quarter of Whiterun. Gloved, cloaked, and hooded against the chill of the morning, her dark skin and red eyes were not apparent, and no one paid any attention to them. They entered the inn separately. Sven paid the host for a single room, a large meal, and a jug of ale, and Barenziah sneaked in a few minutes later. They ate and drank together gleefully, celebrating their escape, made love vigorously on the narrow bed, then fell into an exhausted sleep. They stayed a week in Whiterun. Straw earned a bit of money running errands, and Barenziah robbed a few houses at night. Barenziah continued to dress as a boy. She cut her hair short and dyed her flame-red tresses jet black as a further disguise, and kept out of sight as much as possible, for there were few dark elves in Whiterun. When Straw got them places as guards for a merchant caravan that was traveling east, the sergeant looked her over dubiously. He chuckled. "Dark elf, ain't ya? Like setting a wolf to guard the sheep, that is. Still, I need arms, and we ain't going near enough to Morrowind that ye can betray us to your brothers. Our homegrown bandits will, as life, cut your throat as mine." The sergeant gave Straw an appraising look, then abruptly spun back to Barenziah, whipping out his short sword, but she had her knife out, and was in a defensive stance. Straw drew his own knife and circled to the man's rear. The sergeant dropped his blade and then chuckled again. "Not bad, kids, not bad. How are you with the bow, Dark Elf? Barenziah demonstrated her prowess. Aye, not bad at all. And you'll be keen of eye by night and of hearing at all times. A trusty Dark Elf makes as good a fighting man as any could ask for. I know, I served under Semekis himself before I lost this arm and got validated out of the Emperor's forces. We could betray them. I know folks who'd pay well, Straw said later, and as they bedded down for their night in the old inn, or rob them ourselves. They're very rich. Those merchants are, Barry. Barenziah chuckled. With whatever would we do with so much money? And we need their protection for traveling quite as much as they need ours. We could buy a little farm and settle down. Peasant, Barenziah thought scornfully. Straw was a peasant and had a peasant's dream, but all she said was, "Not here, Straw. We're too close to Darkmoor still. We'll have our more chances farther east." The caravan went only as far east as Sungard. Tiber Septim had done much in the way of building relatively safe patrolled highways, but its tolls were steep, and this particular caravan kept the side roads as much as possible to avoid them. This exposed them to the hazards of robber barons, both human and orcish, and roving bands of brigands and various races. But such were the perils of trade and profit. They had two such encounters before reaching Sungard. An ambush which Barenziah keen ears detected in plenty of time for them to circle about and surprise lurkers, and a night attack by a mixed band of Khajiit, humans, and wood elves. The latter were a skilled band, and even Barenziah did not hear them sneaking up in time to give much warning. The fighting was fierce, the attackers were driven off, but two of the caravan's guards were killed, and Straw got a nasty cut on his thigh before he and Barenziah killed his Khajiit assailant. Barenziah rather enjoyed this life. The garrulous sergeant had taken a liking to her, and she spent most of her evenings sitting around a campfire listening to his tales of campaigning in Morrowind with Tiber Septim and Semekis. Semekis had been made a general after Mournhold fell, the sergeant said. He's a fine soldier, Semekis is, but there was more than soldiery involved in Morrowind, if you take my drift. Well, you know about that, I expect. I don't remember, Barenziah said. I've mostly lived in Skyrim. My mother married a Skyrim man. They're both dead, though. What happened to the Lord and Lady of Mournhold? The sergeant shrugged. I've never heard. Dead, I expect. All Morrowind's under military rule now. It's pretty quiet. Maybe too quiet. Like a calm before a storm. Going back there? Maybe, Barenziah said. The truth was that she was drawn to Morrowind like a magnet. Straw sensed it and was unhappy about it. He was unhappy anyway, since they could not bed together, as she was supposed to be a boy. Barenziah rather missed it too, but not as much as Straw did, seemingly. The sergeant wanted them to sign on for the return trip, but gave them a bonus when they parted, and letters of recommendation. Straw wanted to settle permanently near Sungard, but Barenziah insisted on continuing to travel east. I'm the Queen of Mournhold by right, she said, unsure whether it was true or it was a story she had made up as a child. I want to go home. I need to go home. That at least was true. She had run out of mushrooms and was very hungry for them. She found a few for sale in the Sungard marketplace, but they were not as good or satisfying as the ones the courier had brought. After a few weeks, they managed to get places in a caravan heading east. But by early winter they were in Riften, and near the Morrowind border. But the weather had grown severe, and they were told no merchant caravans would set forth until mid-spring. Barenziah stood atop the city walls and stared across the deep gorge that separated Riften from the snow-clad mountain wall of Morrowind beyond. Barry, Straw said gently. Mournhold's a long way off yet, nearly as far as we've come already, and the lands between are wild, full of wolves and bandits and orcs and still worse creatures. We'll have to wait for spring. There's Silgrod Tower, Barry said, referring to the dark elf town that had grown up around the ancient tower that guarded the border between Skyrim and Morrowind. The bridge guards won't let me across, Barry. They're crack Imperial troops. They can't be bribed. If you go alone. I won't try and stop you. But what will you do? Silgrod Tower is full of Imperial troops. Will you become a washerwoman for them? A camp follower? No, Barenziah said thoughtfully. Actually, the idea was not entirely unappealing. She was sure that she could earn a modest living by sleeping with the soldiers for money. She had a few adventures of that sort as they crossed Skyrim. When she dressed as a woman and slipped away from Straw, she'd only been looking for a bit of variety. Straw was sweet but dull. She had been startled but pleased when the men she picked up offered her money afterwards. Straw had been unhappy about it, though, and would shout for a while, then sulk for days afterwards if he caught her at it. He was jealous. He'd even threatened to leave her. But the Imperial Guards were a tough and brutal lot by all accounts, and Barenziah had heard some very ugly stories during her travels. The ugliest stories had come from the lips of ex-veterans around the caravan campfires and were proudly recounted. They'd been trying to shock her in Straw, she realized, but she also realized that there was some truth behind the wild tales. Straw hated that kind of talk and hated having her hear it, but there was a part of him that was fascinated by it. Barenziah had encouraged Straw to seek out other women, but he said he didn't want anyone but her. She told him she didn't feel that way, but she did like him better than anyone else. Then why do you go with other men? I don't know, dear. Straw sighed. They say dark elf women are like that. Barenziah smiled and shrugged. I know, I guess that's all the explanation there is. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was The Real Barenziah Part 2, and that is also the end of today's bonus episode. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.